The morning of October 15th started like any other at Riverside Middle School in Columbus, Ohio. 13-year-old Maya Richardson had no idea that by lunchtime, she'd be sitting in the principal's office with a razor in her hand and tears streaming down her face. What happened next would shake the entire school district to its core and leave Principal Patricia Brennan questioning every decision she'd ever made in her 23-year career in education. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Richardson had always been the kind of student who flew under the radar at Riverside Middle School. She wasn't the class clown, wasn't the star athlete, and certainly wasn't the type to cause trouble. Her shoulder-length auburn hair was always neatly braided by her grandmother each morning, and she wore the same faded jeans and hand-me-down sweaters that marked her as one of the quieter kids from the east side of town. That Tuesday, morning started with Maya rushing through the school's front doors at 7:47 a.m., 3 minutes before the final bell. She'd overslept again, something that had been happening more frequently since her mother started working double shifts at the packaging plant. Her grandmother, Elena, was getting older and sometimes forgot to wake her up on time. Maya slipped into her first period English class just as Mrs. Caldwell was calling attendance. She took her usual seat in the third row, pulled out her worn composition notebook, and tried to blend into the background like she always did. But today felt different somehow. There was an electricity in the air, a tension that made her stomach twist with unease. During the second period, the whispers started. Maya caught fragments of conversation from the girl sitting behind her in algebra class. Something about new rules, something about appearance standards, something about Principal Brennan being in a mood. Maya tried to focus on the quadratic equations on the board, but the hushed voices kept pulling her attention away. "Did you hear what happened to Jennifer Martinez yesterday?" whispered Chloe Peterson to her friend Sarah Kim. "No, what?" "She got detention for 3 days just because her nail polish was too bright. Principal Brennan said it was distracting to the learning environment." Maya unconsciously touched her own nails, painted a soft pink by her grandmother over the weekend. They seemed harmless enough, but now she wasn't so sure. The real trouble began during third period study hall. Maya was quietly working on her history homework when she felt someone tugging at her braid. She turned around to see Tyler Morrison, a stocky 8th grader with a reputation for causing problems, grinning at her with malicious intent. "Hey, Richardson," Tyler said loud enough for half the room to hear. "What's with the weird hair thing? Are you trying to look like some kind of princess or something?" Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Leave me alone, Tyler." But Tyler wasn't finished. He reached forward and gave her braid another sharp tug, this time hard enough to make her head jerk backward. "I'm talking to you, weirdo. Why don't you wear your hair normally like everyone else?" "Stop it," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the eyes of other students turning toward them, and her mortification deepened. Tyler laughed and reached for her braid again, but this time Maya was ready. She spun around in her seat and, without thinking, swatted his hand away with more force than she intended. The sharp crack of her palm against his knuckles echoed through the suddenly quiet study hall. "She hit me," Tyler yelped, pulling his hand back dramatically. "Did everyone see that? Maya Richardson just attacked me." The study hall supervisor, Mr. Chun, looked up from his desk with weary eyes. He'd been breaking up conflicts between students for 15 years, and he knew trouble when he saw it brewing. "Both of you settle down. Tyler, return to your seat." Maya, face forward, but the damage was already done. Tyler had an audience now, and he wasn't about to waste it. "I was just asking about her weird hair, and she totally freaked out on me. Look at my hand, she probably broke something." Maya wanted to disappear into the floor. She could feel the stares of her classmates boring into her back, and could hear the whispered comments starting up again. This was exactly the kind of attention she spent her entire school career trying to avoid. "That's enough," Mr. Chun said firmly. "Tyler, if you're injured, go to the nurse. Maya, I want to see you after class." The remaining 20 minutes of study hall crawled by at an agonizing pace. Maya stared down at her textbook, the words blurring together as she fought back. Tears of frustration and embarrassment. She'd never been in trouble at school before, never even had her name written on the board for talking during class. Now she was going to get detention, maybe even suspension, and she'd have to explain everything to her mother and grandmother. When the bell finally rang, Maya gathered her books slowly, hoping that somehow Mr. Chun would forget about wanting to speak with her. But as the other students filed out of the room, he gestured for her to approach his desk. "Maya," he said gently, "I know Tyler was bothering you, but you can't respond to harassment with physical contact. You understand that, right?" Maya nodded miserably. "He kept pulling my hair. I just wanted him to stop." "I understand, and I'm going to talk to Tyler about his behavior too. But I have to write you up for physical contact. I'm sorry, but those are the rules." 20 minutes. Later, Maya found herself sitting outside Principal Brennan's office, clutching the disciplinary referral form and trying not to cry. She'd never been sent to the principal's office before, and the imposing oak door seemed to loom over her like a gateway to certain doomed. Principal Patricia Brennan was not having a good day. The district superintendent had called that morning to inform her that Riverside Middle School's test scores were still below state standards. The parent-teacher conference scheduling system had crashed, and now she had a stack of disciplinary referrals to review. At 58 years old, she'd seen every type of student misbehavior imaginable, but lately it seemed like the problems were getting worse and the solutions were getting harder to find. When she called Maya into her office, she barely looked up from the paperwork on her desk. Maya had been to the main office before to deliver messages from teachers, but she'd never actually been inside the principal's private office. It was smaller than she'd expected, with dark wood furniture and diplomas covering one wall. "Sit down." "Miss Richardson," Principal Brennan said without looking up, "I see here that you struck another student during study hall." "He was pulling my hair," Maya said quietly. "I asked him to stop, but he wouldn't." Principal Brennan finally looked up, her steel-gray eyes focusing on Maya with an intensity that made the girl squirm in her chair. "And you thought the appropriate response was to hit him?" "I didn't hit him. I just pushed his hand away." "According to the report from Mr. Chun, you made physical contact with Tyler Morrison's hand in an aggressive manner. That constitutes assault under our zero-tolerance policy." Maya's heart sank. She'd heard about the zero-tolerance policy. It meant automatic suspension for any student involved in physical altercations, regardless of the circumstances. "Please," Maya said, her voice cracking slightly. "I've never been in trouble before. I was just trying to get him to leave me alone." Principal Brennan studied Maya for a long moment, taking in the girl's appearance. The neat braid, the modest clothing, the obvious distress. Something about the situation bothered her, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. "Tell me about your hair, Miss Richardson." Maya blinked in confusion. "My hair?" "Yes, why do you wear it in that style?" "My grandmother braids it for me every morning. She's been doing it since I was little." Principal Brennan's expression hardened slightly. She'd been dealing with dress code violations all semester, and lately it seemed like students were finding new and creative ways to push the boundaries of what was considered appropriate for a school environment. "I see. And has anyone ever told you that your hairstyle might be considered distracting?" Maya's confusion deepened. "Distracting?" "Some might argue that elaborate hairstyles draw attention away from learning. Our student handbook clearly states that all students must maintain a neat, conservative appearance that doesn't disrupt the educational environment. For the first time in the conversation, Maya felt a spark of indignation. But it's just a braid. My grandmother taught me that keeping your hair neat and tidy shows respect. Principal Brennan stood up from her chair and walked around the desk to where Maya was sitting. She looked down at the girl's braid, studying it with the intensity of someone examining evidence at a crime scene. The problem, Miss Richardson, is that your hair has become the center of attention today. First, it attracted unwanted harassment from another student. Now you've escalated the situation by responding with violence. Perhaps it's time to consider more practical solution. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't like the way Principal Brennan was looking at her, didn't like the calculating tone in her voice. I don't understand what you mean. Principal. Brennan walked over to a cabinet in the corner of her office and opened one of the drawers. When she turned back around, she was holding something that made Maya's blood run cold. Electric hair clippers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sometimes, Principal Brennan said, her voice taking on an eerily calm quality, the best way to solve a problem is to eliminate it entirely. Maya's world seemed to slow down as she stared at the electric clippers in Principal Brennan's hands. The steady hum of the fluorescent lights overhead became deafening, and she could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. You can't be serious, Maya whispered, gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Principal Brennan plugged the clippers into an outlet behind her desk, the cords snaking across the carpet like a warning. I'm very serious, Miss Richardson. You seem to think that rules don't apply to you. First, you assault another student. Then, you argue with me about school policy. It's clear that you need to learn about consequences. Maya shot to her feet, her chair rolling backward and hitting the wall with a loud thud. This is crazy. You can't just cut off my hair because I got in trouble. Sit back down, Principal Brennan commanded, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Or would you prefer I call security and have you suspended for the rest of the semester? The threat hit Maya like a physical blow. Her mother was already struggling to make ends meet, working 16-hour days just to keep food on the table and pay rent on their small apartment. If Maya got suspended, if she fell behind in her classes, if she couldn't graduate on time, the ripple effects would destroy everything her family had worked for. Slowly, reluctantly, Maya sank back into the chair. Tears began to stream down her cheeks, but she made no sound. She'd learned early in life that crying rarely solved anything and often made situations worse. Principal Brennan moved behind Maya's chair, and the girl could feel the woman's presence looming over her like a dark cloud. Now then, let's take care of this distraction once and for all. The clippers buzzed to life, their mechanical whir filling the small office. Maya squeezed her eyes shut and tried to transport herself somewhere else. Anywhere else. She thought about her grandmother's gentle hands working through her hair each morning, the way Elena would hum old Spanish lullabies while she braided. She thought about the stories her grandmother told about their family's traditions, about how a woman's hair was her crown, her pride, her connection to generations of strong women who came before her. The first pass of the clippers sent a cascade of auburn hair tumbling to the floor. Maya bit down on her lower lip so hard she tasted blood, determined not to give Principal Brennan the satisfaction of hearing her sob. There, Principal Brennan said with grim satisfaction. Much better already. But as she continued her work, something strange began to happen. The initial rush of power and control that Principal Brennan had felt started to ebb away, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Maya wasn't fighting back, wasn't screaming or cursing or demanding to call her parents. She was just sitting there, silent tears rolling down her face, accepting this humiliation with a dignity that made Principal Brennan feel suddenly, inexplicably small. Meanwhile, outside the principal's office, Word was beginning to spread through the school like wildfire. Jessica Wu, a 7th grader who'd been waiting to speak with the secretary about a schedule change, had heard the sound of clippers through the thin office walls. She'd pressed her ear to the door and caught fragments of the conversation inside, enough to piece together what was happening. Jessica didn't waste time. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her older brother Marcus, who was in 10th grade at the high school across town. "Oh my God, something terrible is happening at school. Principal cutting off girls' hair as punishment. This is insane." Marcus, who had always been protective of his little sister, and the message made his blood boil. He immediately forwarded the text to his girlfriend Samantha, who worked part-time at the local newspaper. Within minutes, Samantha was on the phone with her editor, explaining the potential story brewing at Riverside Middle School. Back in the principal's office, Maya's transformation was nearly complete. What had once been a beautiful, carefully maintained braid now lay in scattered clumps around the chair. Her scalp showed through in patches where Principal Brennan had been overzealous with the clippers, creating an uneven, brutal cut that looked more like the result of an accident than any intentional hairstyle. "There," Principal Brennan said, switching off the clippers and stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Now you won't have to worry about anyone pulling your hair, will you?" Maya slowly opened her eyes and looked down at the pile of hair surrounding her feet. Each strand represented years of growth, hours of her grandmother's patient care, a connection to her family's heritage that had just been severed with shocking brutality. She reached up with trembling fingers to touch what remained of her hair, feeling the rough, uneven stubble that had replaced her grandmother's careful braids. "Clean up this mess," Principal Brennan ordered, gesturing to the hair on the floor. "And then you can return to class. I trust this experience has taught you something about following rules and respecting authority." Maya knelt down and began gathering her hair with shaking hands, stuffing the pieces into the small wastebasket beside Principal Brennan's desk. The auburn strands felt foreign now, like they belonged to someone else entirely. She thought about going home, about walking through the front door and seeing her grandmother's face when she realized what had happened. The thought made her stomach twist with a new kind of anguish. As Maya worked, she became aware of voices in the hallway outside the office. At first, it was just the usual chatter of students moving between classes, but gradually the tone began to change. The conversations grew more urgent, more animated. She could hear her name being mentioned, and could catch fragments of disbelief and outrage. Principal Brennan heard it too, and her confidence began to waver. She walked to her office window and peered out at the hallway, where she could see clusters of students huddled together, their phones out, their faces animated with excitement and anger. A few teachers had emerged from their classrooms, drawn by the unusual commotion. "What are they all talking about?" Principal Brennan muttered, more to herself than to Maya. The answer came in the form of a sharp knock on the office door. Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, the school's vice principal and Principal Brennan's longtime colleague, entered without waiting for permission. Her face was pale, her usual composure completely shattered. "Patricia," she said urgently, "we need to talk now." Principal Brennan glanced at Maya, who was still on her hands and knees collecting hair from the carpet. "Miss Richardson, you're dismissed. Return to your regular classes and remember what we've discussed here today." Maya stood up slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. She could feel Mrs. Hendricks staring at her with a mixture of shock and horror, taking in the brutal haircut and the tear stains on her cheeks. Without a word, Maya gathered her backpack and walked toward the door, keeping her head down to avoid making eye contact with either administrator. As soon as Maya left the office, Mrs. Hendricks closed the door and turned to face her colleague. With barely contained fury, "Have you completely lost your mind?" she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Principal Brennan straightened her shoulders defensively. "I disciplined a student who was disrupting the learning environment. It's well within my authority, as your authority? Mrs. Hendricks interrupted. Patricia, you just forcibly cut off a child's hair. There are already photos circulating on social media. Parents are calling the school, demanding answers. The district office has been notified. This isn't discipline, this is assault. For the first time since she'd picked up the clippers, Principal Brennan felt a flicker of genuine fear. Photos? How could there be photos? Students had been taking pictures of Maya as she walked through the hallways. Look at this, Mrs. Hendricks held up her phone, showing a blurry but unmistakable image of Maya's butchered hair. This has already been shared hundreds of times. The local news station called 5 minutes ago asking for a statement. Principal Brennan sank into her chair, the weight of her actions beginning to settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. She looked at the clippers still sitting on her desk, the scattered bits of hair she'd missed during cleanup, the disciplinary form that had started this entire nightmare. I was just trying to maintain order, she said weakly. The girl was becoming a disruption. Her hair was causing problems. Her hair was causing problems? Mrs. Hendricks repeated incredulously. Patricia, listen to yourself. You've just created the biggest scandal this district has seen in decades. And for what? Because a 13-year-old girl wore her hair in a braid? Outside the office, Maya was making her way through the hallways in a daze. Students stopped mid-conversation as she passed, their expressions ranging from sympathy to outright shock. Some pulled out their phones to take pictures, while others whispered behind their hands to friends. The attention Maya had spent her entire school career avoiding was now focused on her with laser intensity. She ducked into the nearest bathroom and locked herself in a stall, finally allowing herself to break down completely. The sobs came in. Great, heaving waves, each one seeming to tear something vital from deep inside her chest. She touched her ruined hair again, feeling the jagged edges where the clippers had cut too close, the bald patches where her scalp showed through. But even as she cried, Maya could hear the voices of other girls entering the bathroom, their conversations revolving around what had happened to her. And for the first time since leaving Principal Brennan's office, she began to realize that she wasn't alone in this. The other students weren't laughing at her or mocking her appearance. They were outraged on her behalf. This is so messed up, one girl was saying. How is this even legal? My mom is freaking out, another voice replied. She's already called the school board. Someone needs to stop Principal Brennan before she does this to someone else. Maya wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. Maybe Mrs. Hendricks was right. Maybe this was bigger than just one girl's bad day at school. Maybe what had happened in that office was so far beyond the bounds of acceptable behavior that it couldn't be ignored or swept under the rug. And somewhere across town, Maya's father, David Richardson, was sitting in his construction trailer, about to receive a phone call that would change everything. David Richardson was reviewing blueprints for a new housing development when his phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. As the foreman for Midwest Construction, he usually ignored calls from numbers he didn't recognize during work hours, but something made him answer this one. Mr. Richardson, this is Angela Martinez. My daughter Sophia goes to school with Maya. David frowned, setting down his pencil. Is everything okay? Did something happen to Maya? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and David could hear the woman taking a deep breath. Mr. Richardson, I don't know how to tell you this, but Principal Brennan cut off your daughter's hair today, as punishment. The words didn't register at first. David heard them, but his brain refused to process their meaning. I'm sorry. What did you say? Maya got into some kind of incident with another student and Principal Brennan. She used clippers on her, cut all her hair off. My Sophia sent me a picture, and I just ... I had to call you. This isn't right, Mr. Richardson. This can't be legal. David's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. Send me that picture, now. When the image came through 30 seconds later, David stared at his phone screen in complete disbelief. The girl in the photo barely looked like his daughter. Maya's beautiful auburn hair, the hair that Alina spent so much time caring for each morning. The hair that connected her to 3 generations of Richardson women had been hacked away, leaving behind an uneven, brutal cut that looked like the work of a disturbed person rather than any kind of reasonable discipline. David was already reaching for his keys before he'd fully processed what he was going to do. He called out to his assistant foreman, "Jake, you're in charge for the rest of the day. Emergency at Maya's school." The drive from the construction site to Riverside Middle School normally took 25 minutes. David made it in 12, his Ford F-150 roaring through yellow lights and taking corners at speeds that would have gotten him pulled over on any other day. His mind raced as he drove, cycling through disbelief, rage, and a protective fury that he'd never experienced before. David Richardson was not a man who made scenes. At 42 years old, he'd built his reputation in the construction industry on being steady, reliable, and professional under pressure. He'd raised Maya mostly on his own since his wife died when Maya was 7, and he'd done it quietly, without drama or fanfare. But as he pulled into the school parking lot and saw the cluster of news vans already gathering, he felt something primal and dangerous stirring in his chest. The scene inside Riverside Middle School was unlike anything David had ever witnessed. The main hallway buzzed with an energy that felt electric and volatile. Students clustered around lockers and in doorways, their voices animated and angry. Teachers stood in small groups, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Several parents had already arrived and were demanding answers from overwhelmed office staff. David's work boots echoed against the polished linoleum as he strode toward the main office, his hard hat still on his head, his fluorescent safety vest marking him as someone who'd dropped everything to be here. Students parted to let him pass, and he could hear whispers following in his wake. "That's Maya's dad. He looks really mad. I wouldn't want to be Principal Brennan right now." The main office was in chaos. The secretary, Mrs. Williams, was fielding phone calls while trying to manage a growing crowd of angry parents. The vice principal, Mrs. Hendricks, was attempting to maintain order while clearly being overwhelmed by the situation. "I want to see Principal Brennan," David announced, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Now," Mrs. Williams looked up from her phone with obvious relief. "Mr. Richardson? Principal Brennan is currently indisposed. Perhaps Mrs. Hendricks could." "I didn't ask for the vice principal," David interrupted, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "I asked for the person who assaulted my daughter. Where is she?" The word assaulted hung in the air like a challenge, and David could see its impact ripple through the room. Other parents turned to look at him with recognition and solidarity. Several pulled out their phones to record what was clearly about to become a confrontation. Mrs. Hendricks approached David cautiously, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Mr. Richardson, I understand you're upset, and you have every right to be. But perhaps we could discuss this privately." "Privately?" David's voice rose, and the entire office fell silent. "My daughter was publicly humiliated by your principal. She's probably hiding in some bathroom right now, traumatized and embarrassed, while that woman sits in her office thinking she did the right thing. There's nothing private about this anymore." As if summoned by his words, Principal Brennan's office door opened, and she emerged looking haggard and defensive. Her usually impeccable appearance was disheveled, her gray hair slightly mussed, her professional demeanor cracking under the pressure of the day's events. "Mr. Richardson," she said, attempting to regain control of the situation, "I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss your daughter's behavior and—" "My daughter's behavior?" David stepped forward, and Principal Brennan instinctively took a step back. "Let me tell you about my daughter's behavior, lady. She gets up every morning at 6:30. She helps her grandmother make breakfast. She does her homework without being told. She's never been in trouble, never gotten detention, never even had her name on the board for talking in class. That's my daughter's behavior." Principal Brennan's face flushed red, but she held her ground. "Your daughter struck another student. Today, she was disruptive and argumentative. I was well within my rights to what?" David's voice was dangerously quiet now. To assault a child? To forcibly cut off her hair like some kind of medieval punishment? What rights gave you permission to do that? The crowd in the office had grown larger, with more parents arriving and students finding excuses to linger near the doorway. Someone was definitely recording the confrontation, and David could see the local news reporter he'd noticed in the parking lot, trying to get a better view through the office windows. "I was maintaining discipline in my school," Principal Brennan said, her voice rising to match David's intensity. "Your daughter needed to learn about consequences, about respecting authority. Her hair was becoming a distraction, and her hair was becoming a distraction?" David repeated, his voice filled with incredulous rage. "Are you insane? She wore her hair in a braid." "A braid? Her grandmother braids it every morning because that's how our family has always done it. That's tradition. That's culture. That's love. And you destroyed it because you thought it was distracting?" Principal Brennan's composure finally cracked completely. "Don't you dare lecture me about running my school. I've been an educator for over 20 years, and I know disruption when I see it. Your daughter was asking for trouble with that that elaborate hairstyle, and when trouble found her, she responded with violence. I did what needed to be done." The silence that followed her words was deafening. David stared at Principal Brennan with a mixture of disbelief and disgust that made several people in the room visibly uncomfortable. "Elaborate hairstyle," he repeated slowly. "You think a 13-year-old girl wearing her hair in a braid is asking for trouble? I think students need to follow dress codes and behavioral standards," Principal Brennan replied, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Show me," David said suddenly. "What? Show me your dress code where it says you can cut a student's hair. Show me the policy that gives you the right to use clippers on a child as punishment. Show me anything, anything at all, that justifies what you did to my daughter." Principal Brennan opened her mouth, then closed it again. The truth was, there was no such policy. There was no precedent, no regulation, no rule that gave her the authority to do what she'd done. She'd acted in a moment of frustration and poor judgment, and now she was facing the consequences. "Where is Maya now?" David asked, his voice returning to that dangerous quiet tone. Mrs. Hendricks cleared her throat nervously. We're not sure. She left the office after the incident, and we haven't seen her since." David's jaw clenched. "You mean to tell me that after you traumatized my daughter, you lost track of her? She could be anywhere in this building, hiding, crying, and you don't even know where she is?" He turned away from Principal Brennan and addressed the room at large. "Has anyone seen Maya Richardson in the last hour?" A small voice piped up from near the doorway. "She's in the second floor. Girls' bathroom by the science wing. She's been there since the third period." David nodded his thanks to the student and headed for the door, but Principal Brennan's voice stopped him. "Mr. Richardson, we're not finished here. There are procedures to follow, forms to fill out. Your daughter still needs to face consequences for her actions." David turned around slowly, and the look in his eyes made Principal Brennan take another step backward. "Lady," he said with deadly calm, "the only person in this building who's going to face consequences is you. And when I'm done making sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are, you're going to wish you'd never heard the name Richardson." As David left the office to find his daughter, the crowd that had gathered began to disperse, but the energy in the building remained electric. Students hurried to spread word of the confrontation. Parents made angry phone calls to district officials, and somewhere in the chaos, Principal Brennan began to realize that her career might have just come to an end. The storm was just beginning. David climbed the stairs to the second floor two at a time, his work boots thundering against the metal steps. The hallways were mostly empty now as classes had resumed, but he could feel eyes watching him through classroom windows as he passed. His fluorescent safety vest and hard hat made him impossible to miss, a towering figure of paternal fury moving through the sterile corridors with singular purpose. The girls' bathroom near the science wing was tucked away in a corner, partially hidden behind a bank of lockers. As David approached, he could hear the soft sound of crying coming from behind the closed door. His heart, which had been pounding with rage just moments before, now broke completely at the sound of his daughter's muffled sobs. He knocked gently on the bathroom door. "Maya, sweetheart, it's Dad. I'm here." The crying stopped abruptly, followed by the sound of a stall door creaking open. Maya's voice came through the door, small and broken. "Daddy? Yeah, baby girl, I'm right here. Can you come out?" The door opened slowly, and David had to grip the doorframe to steady himself when he saw his daughter. The photos he'd been sent hadn't fully captured the brutality of what had been done to her. Maya's beautiful auburn hair had been hacked away, so unevenly that patches of her scalp showed through, while other areas had been left with jagged tufts that stuck out at odd angles. But it was the look in her eyes that truly devastated him, the hollow, traumatized expression of a child who'd had her trust in the adult world shattered. "Oh, Maya," David whispered, pulling his daughter into his arms. She collapsed against his chest, her thin frame shaking with renewed sobs. He could feel her tears soaking through his work shirt as he held her, one hand gently stroking what remained of her hair. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Maya choked out between sobs. "I didn't mean to get in trouble. Tyler was pulling my braid, and I just wanted him to stop. And then, David murmured, his own voice thick with emotion. "You have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. This isn't your fault, sweetheart. Not any of it." They stood there in the hallway for several minutes, father and daughter clinging to each other while the normal sounds of school life continued around them. Students occasionally passed by, their expressions ranging from sympathy to shock, but David ignored them all. His entire world had narrowed to the broken girl in his arms. When Maya's crying finally subsided, David gently pulled back to look at her face. "We're going home now, okay? Grandma Alina is waiting for us." Maya's eyes widened with fresh panic. "Abuela doesn't know yet, does she? Oh God, what is she going to say when she sees me?" David's jaw tightened as he thought about how his mother-in-law would react to seeing her beloved granddaughter's butchered hair. Elena had been braiding Maya's hair every morning for 6 years, treating it as a sacred ritual that connected them to their family's heritage. This would devastate her. "Grandma is going to love you no matter what you look like," David said firmly. "And we're going to fix this. I promise you, Maya, we're going to make this right." As they walked toward the school's exit, David's phone began buzzing with incoming calls and text messages. Word of the incident had spread beyond the school walls, and it seemed like everyone in their small community was trying to reach him. He ignored the calls for now, focusing instead on getting Maya safely to his truck. The parking lot was now filled with news vans, and David could see reporters setting up cameras and interviewing parents and students. He cursed it under his breath, realizing that Maya would have to run the gauntlet of media attention just to get to their vehicle. "Dad," Maya said quietly, noticing the news crews, "are those people here because of me?" "They're here because what happened to you was wrong," David replied. "But we don't have to talk to them if you don't want to." As they approached David's truck, a reporter with perfectly styled blonde hair thrust a microphone toward them. "Mr. Richardson, can you comment on what happened to your daughter today? How do you feel about Principal Brennan's disciplinary methods?" David stopped walking and turned to face the reporter, his expression dark. Maya instinctively moved behind him, using his large frame to shield herself from the cameras. "How do I feel?" David repeated, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "I feel like a principal who thinks she can assault a child as punishment shouldn't be anywhere near kids. I feel like anyone who would humiliate a 13-year-old girl for wearing her hair in a braid has no business being an educator. That's how I feel." The reporter's eyes lit up at the quote, but David was already moving again, helping Maya into the passenger seat of his truck and closing the door firmly behind her. The drive home was quiet except for the sound of David's phone continuing to buzz with incoming messages. Maya sat curled up in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped around herself, staring out the window at the familiar streets of their neighborhood. Everything outside looked normal, the same houses, the same trees, the same mailboxes, but Maya felt like she was seeing it all through different eyes. She was no longer the same girl who had walked into Riverside Middle School that morning. Their house was a modest two-story colonial on Maple Street, with Elena's carefully tended flower garden out front and a tire swing hanging from the old oak tree in the backyard. David had bought the house right after Maya was born, choosing it specifically because it was close to good schools and in a safe neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on him now. Elena was waiting for them on the front porch, her weathered hands clasped tightly in front of her. At 73 years old, she still moved with the grace and energy of someone much younger, but today she looked every one of her years. The phone calls from concerned neighbors had already reached her, preparing her for the worst, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of seeing Maya's destroyed hair. "Mia," Elena whispered as Maya climbed the porch steps, her voice breaking on the Spanish endearment she'd used for her granddaughter since birth. Maya fell into her grandmother's arms, and Elena's tears began to flow silently as she took in the full extent of the damage. The braid she had so carefully woven that morning was gone, replaced by the brutal handiwork of someone who had no understanding of what they were destroying. "Who did this to you, Nita?" Elena asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "The principal," Maya replied, her voice muffled against Elena's shoulder. "She said my hair was distracting and that I needed to learn about the consequences." Elena's expression hardened in a way that David had rarely seen. His mother-in-law was typically one of the gentlest people he knew, someone who found good in everyone and rarely spoke harshly about anyone. But as she looked at her granddaughter's ruined hair, something fierce and protective awakened in her eyes. "Distracting," Elena repeated, the word dripping with contempt. "She called our family's tradition distracting." They moved inside, where Elena immediately set about making Maya's favorite comfort food, homemade tamales and hot chocolate with cinnamon. As she worked in the kitchen, David sat with Maya at the dining room table, finally answering some of the dozens of missed calls on his phone. The first call was from his boss at Midwest Construction. "Dave, I just heard what happened. Take all the time you need, man. Family comes first." The second call was from Maya's homeroom teacher, Mrs. Caldwell. "Mr. Richardson, I am so sorry about what happened today. I want you to know that many of us on the faculty are horrified by Principal Brennan's actions. This doesn't represent what we believe education should be." The third call was from a lawyer named Patricia Santos, who specialized in educational law. "Mr. Richardson, my daughter goes to Riverside Middle School, and she told me what happened to Maya. I'd like to offer my services pro bono if you're interested in pursuing legal action. What Principal Brennan did was not just wrong, it was illegal." As David listened to voicemail after voicemail expressing support and outrage, he began to realize that Maya's story had struck a nerve far beyond their small community. This wasn't just about one girl's bad day at school anymore. It had become a symbol of administrative overreach and the way children could be victimized by the very system meant to protect them. Elena emerged from the kitchen carrying a steaming mug of hot chocolate, which she placed in front of Maya with a gentle kiss on the top of her granddaughter's damaged head. "Abuela," Maya said quietly, I'm sorry about my hair. I know how much you loved braiding it." Elena sat down beside her granddaughter and took her hands. "Mia, hair grows back. But what that woman did to you, trying to take away your dignity, your sense of self, that is unforgivable. Your hair was never just hair. It was a connection to your mother, to me, to all the women in our family who came before us. She tried to cut away our history, but she failed. Do you know why?" Maya shook her head. "Because our strength, our heritage, our love for each other, it doesn't live in our hair. It lives here." Elena placed her hand over Maya's heart. "And no one can take that away from us. No one." David watched the exchange between his daughter and mother-in-law with a mixture of pride and determination. They were right. Principal Brennan had tried to diminish Maya, to break her spirit, and teach her to accept abuse from authority figures. But she had underestimated the Richardson family's strength and their willingness to fight back. As evening approached, David made a decision that would change everything. He picked up his phone and called the number that lawyer Patricia Santos had left in her voicemail. "Miss Santos? This is David Richardson. We need to talk." Patricia Santos arrived at the Richardson household within an hour of David's call, carrying a briefcase and wearing the determined expression of someone who had built her career fighting for students' rights. At 38 years old, she had already established herself as one of the most respected educational law attorneys in Ohio, known for taking on cases that others considered unwinnable. "Mr. Richardson," she said as David opened the front door, "I want you to know that in 15 years of practicing educational law, I have never seen anything as egregious as what happened to your daughter today." David led her into the living room where Maya sat curled up on the couch next to Elena, a knitted cap now covering the worst of the damage to her hair. Maya looked up nervously as the lawyer entered, instinctively touching the cap to make sure it was secure. Patricia's expression softened immediately when she saw Maya. "Hi there, Maya. I'm Patricia Santos, but you can call me Ms. Pat if you want. I'm here because I think what happened to you today was completely wrong, and I want to help make sure it never happens to another student." Over the next 2 hours, Patricia methodically documented every detail of Maya's experience. She took photographs of Maya's hair from multiple angles, recorded Maya's account of the events leading up to the incident, and gathered character references from teachers who knew Maya well. Elena provided testimony about the cultural significance of the braiding tradition in their family, while David shared the emotional impact the incident had on their household. "What Principal Brennan did violates at least 6 different federal and state laws," Patricia explained as she reviewed her notes. "We're looking at assault, violation of civil rights, infliction of emotional distress, and violation of Maya's 14th Amendment rights to due process. The school district is going to be facing serious liability here." As Patricia spoke, David's phone rang with yet another call from a reporter seeking comment. The story had now been picked up by national news outlets, and hashtag Justice for Maya was trending on social media. Parents from across the country were sharing their own stories of administrative abuse, turning Maya's incident into a rallying cry for educational reform. Meanwhile, back at Riverside Middle School, the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control for Principal Brennan. The school board had called an emergency meeting for that evening, and Superintendent Harold Mitchell had already informed her that she was being placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. "Patricia," Superintendent Mitchell said as he stood in her office, surveying the scene of scattered hair still visible on the carpet, despite the custodial staff's attempts to clean it up. "What were you thinking? How did you justify this to yourself?" Principal Brennan sat behind her desk, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale and drawn. The confident, authoritative demeanor she displayed earlier in the day had crumbled completely under the weight of what she was facing. The girl was becoming a problem, she said weakly. Her hair was attracting negative attention, causing disruptions. I thought if I eliminated the source of the problem, you thought you'd assault a child? Superintendent Mitchell interrupted, his voice rising with disbelief. Patricia, you used hair clippers on a 13-year-old girl without her consent or her parents' permission. Do you understand that this could be considered child abuse under Ohio law? The color drained from Principal Brennan's face as the full implications of her actions began to sink in. She'd been so focused on asserting her authority, on maintaining control of her school, that she'd never considered the legal ramifications of what she was doing. I was disciplining a student who had committed assault, she protested. I was well within my authority. Show me, Superintendent Mitchell demanded, echoing David Richardson's earlier challenge. Show me anywhere in the district handbook, anywhere in state education law, anywhere at all, where it says you have the authority to forcibly cut a student's hair as punishment. Principal Brennan opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no such authority. There never had been. Superintendent Mitchell shook his head in disgust. Security will escort you from the building. You're not to return to school property or contact any students, staff, or parents pending the outcome of this investigation. And Patricia, you should probably get yourself a lawyer. The emergency school board meeting that evening was unlike anything the district had ever experienced. The Riverside Community Center had been chosen as the venue because the usual boardroom couldn't accommodate the hundreds of parents, students, and community members who showed up demanding answers. David and Maya arrived together, with Elena and Patricia Santos flanking them for support. Maya had chosen to remove her knitted cap for the meeting, wanting everyone to see exactly what had been done to her. The gasps and murmurs that rippled through the crowd when they entered confirmed that photos and descriptions couldn't fully capture the brutality of her appearance. School Board President Janet Wheeler called the meeting to order, but she was immediately drowned out by angry voices from the audience. How long has this been going on? What other students has Brennan abused? When are you going to fire her? This is child abuse, plain and simple. David stood up, and the crowd gradually quieted to hear what he had to say. He helped Maya to comb her feet beside him, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. My name is David Richardson, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed room. This is my daughter Maya, 13 years old. Honor roll student, never been in trouble in her life. And yesterday morning, she left for school with beautiful hair that her grandmother had braided with love and care, continuing a family tradition that goes back generations. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the audience. She came home looking like this, he continued, gesturing to Maya's damaged hair. Not because she committed some terrible crime. Not because she violated any actual rule or policy, but because Principal Patricia Brennan decided that a 13-year-old girl needed to be taught a lesson about authority. The crowd erupted in angry shouts, but David held up his hand for silence. But you know what? Maya wasn't the only one who learned a lesson yesterday. I learned something too. I learned that person I trusted to keep my daughter safe, to educate her, to treat her with dignity and respect, was capable of something I never could have imagined. I learned that our children are not safe in schools where administrators think they can abuse their power without consequences. Maya stepped forward, her voice small but clear in the hushed auditorium. Principal Brennan told me I was asking for trouble because of how I wore my hair. She said I needed to learn about consequences. Well, I did learn about consequences. I learned that when adults abuse their power, when they hurt children, there have to be consequences for them too. The crowd erupted in applause, with many people rising to their feet. Maya's courage in speaking publicly about her trauma had clearly touched something deep in the community's collective conscience. Patricia Santos took the microphone next, her voice crisp and professional. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened to Maya Richardson represents a fundamental violation of everything we believe about the relationship between educators and students. Principal Brennan didn't just cut off a child's hair, she violated Maya's civil rights, her constitutional rights, and her basic human dignity. She held up a thick folder of documents. I have already filed complaints with the Ohio Department of Education, the Office for Civil Rights, and the local prosecutor's office. We will be pursuing both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit to ensure that Maya receives justice and that this never happens to another child. The rest of the meeting was a formality. One by one, school board members took the microphone to denounce Principal Brennan's actions and promise a full investigation. Superintendent Mitchell announced that Brennan had been terminated effective immediately, and that counseling services would be made available to any students who had been affected by the incident. But the most powerful moment came at the end of the meeting, when Elena Richardson slowly made her way to the microphone. At 73 years old, she moved with dignity and grace, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun that showcased the same traditions Principal Brennan had tried to destroy in her granddaughter. I came to this country 45 years ago, Elena began, her voice accented but strong. I came here believing that America was a place where children could be safe, where they could learn and grow without fear. I taught my daughter to braid her hair the way my mother taught me, and my grandmother taught her. When my daughter died, I passed that tradition to Maya, because I wanted her to know where she came from. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. That woman tried to cut away our history. She tried to shame my granddaughter for honoring her family. But she failed. Maya is stronger than that woman ever imagined, and our family is stronger than any hatred or ignorance she represents. Elena looked directly at Maya, her eyes shining with pride. Mia, your hair will grow back. But your courage, your strength, your dignity, those things can never be taken from you. And anyone who tries will have to answer to all of us. The standing ovation that followed lasted for nearly 10 minutes, with tears streaming down faces throughout the auditorium. Maya hugged her grandmother tightly, feeling for the first time since the incident that maybe, just maybe, something good could come from this nightmare. As the Richardson family left the community center that night, surrounded by supporters and well-wishers, Maya realized that Principal Brennan had indeed taught her about consequences, just not the ones she'd intended. 3 months later, Maya Richardson walked into the Riverside County Courthouse wearing a navy blue dress and a beautiful silk headscarf that Elena had specially embroidered with golden threads. Her hair had begun to grow back, forming a soft auburn fuzz that was slowly but surely returning to its former glory. More importantly, the hollow, traumatized look that had haunted her eyes since the incident had been replaced by something stronger. A quiet confidence that came from knowing she had survived the worst and emerged victorious. The courthouse was packed with supporters, media representatives, and legal observers who had come to witness the conclusion of what had become known nationally as the Riverside hair-cutting case. Patricia Santos had worked tirelessly to build an airtight case against both Principal Brennan and the school district, and today's settlement hearing would finally bring closure to a saga that had captured the nation's attention. Patricia Brennan looked dramatically different from the confident administrator who had wielded those clippers months earlier. Her legal troubles had aged her considerably. Her hair had gone completely gray. Deep lines had formed around her eyes, and she carried herself with the defeated posture of someone whose world had completely collapsed. She sat at the defendant's table next to her attorney, avoiding eye contact with the Richardson family. The criminal charges had been the first domino to fall. Brennan had been convicted of assault and child endangerment, receiving a sentence of 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. Her teaching license had been permanently revoked, ensuring she would never again be in a position to harm children. But the civil lawsuit was where the real reckoning would take place. Judge Margaret Foster called the courtroom to order, her stern expression making it clear that she took this case very seriously. We're here today for the settlement hearing in Richardson versus Brennan and the Riverside School District. Ms. Santos, please present the terms. Patricia Santos stood and addressed the court with the same measured professionalism that had made her such an effective advocate for Maya. Your Honor, after extensive negotiations, we have reached a settlement agreement that addresses both the immediate harm done to Maya Richardson and the systemic changes needed to prevent similar incidents in the future. She outlined the financial terms first, a settlement of $750,000, with $200,000 going directly to Maya's college fund and the remainder covering legal fees, medical expenses for therapy, and compensation for the family's suffering. But the monetary settlement was only part of the story. More importantly, Your Honor, the school district has agreed to implement comprehensive policy reforms. They will establish a student rights ombudsman office, mandate annual training on cultural sensitivity and appropriate disciplinary measures, and create a zero-tolerance policy for any form of physical punishment that involves altering a student's appearance. The judge nodded approvingly. Mr. Richardson, are you satisfied with these terms? David stood up, his hand resting supportively on Maya's shoulder. We are, Your Honor. This was never just about money for our family. We wanted to make sure that what happened to Maya could never happen to another child. But it was Maya herself who provided the most powerful moment of the day. When Judge Foster asked if she wanted to make a statement, the now 14-year-old girl stood with a poise that would have been unimaginable months earlier. Your Honor, Maya began, her voice clear and strong. When Principal Brennan cut my hair, she thought she was teaching me a lesson about following rules and respecting authority. But the lesson I actually learned was much more important than anything she intended. The courtroom was completely silent as Maya continued. I learned that even when adults abuse their power, even when they try to make you feel small and ashamed, you don't have to accept it. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't disrespectful, it's necessary. And I learned that there are good people in the world who will fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. She turned to look directly at Patricia Brennan for the first time since entering the courtroom. I forgive you, Principal Brennan. Not because what you did was okay, but because I won't let anger and resentment take up space in my heart that could be filled with better things. I hope you use this time to think about how you can become a better person. The grace and maturity in Maya's words left many people in the courtroom visibly emotional, including several members of the media who had been covering the story since the beginning. Patricia Brennan herself was crying silently, perhaps finally understanding the full magnitude of what she had destroyed. After the settlement was finalized, the Richardson family emerged from the courthouse to face a crowd of supporters and reporters. Maya had specifically requested that she be allowed to speak to the media, wanting to use this platform to address the broader issues raised by her case. Over the past few months, I've received thousands of letters and messages from students all across the country who have experienced similar treatment from school administrators, Maya told the assembled crowd. Some have been humiliated for their natural hair texture, others for wearing cultural or religious symbols, and still others for simply expressing their individuality in ways that don't fit narrow definitions of what's considered appropriate. She held up a thick folder of letters. These stories break my heart, but they also give me hope. Hope because these students trusted me enough to share their experiences. Hope because they're speaking up instead of suffering in silence. And hope because together we can change the culture that allows these abuses to happen. David watched his daughter with immense pride as she fielded questions from reporters with the skill of someone twice her age. The shy, withdrawn girl who had hidden in a bathroom stall months earlier had transformed into a confident young woman who wasn't afraid to use her voice for positive change. The transformation wasn't limited to Maya. Elena had started a nonprofit organization called Braids of Strength that celebrated cultural hair traditions and provided support to students facing discrimination based on their appearance. The organization had already established chapters in 12 states and was working with school districts nationwide to develop more inclusive policies. David had also found a new purpose. He'd left his construction job to work full-time as an advocate for student rights, using his experience to help other parents navigate the complex world of educational bureaucracy when their children face discrimination or abuse. 6 months after the settlement, Maya was invited to speak at the National Conference on Educational Equity in Washington, D.C. Standing at the podium before an audience of educators, policymakers, and advocates, she looked every inch the leader she had become. "Change is hard," Maya told the conference attendees. "It's hard for institutions to admit they've been doing things wrong. It's hard for individuals to examine their own biases and prejudices. And it's especially hard for children to find the courage to speak up when adults fail them." She paused, touching the silk headscarf that now covered hair that had grown back thicker and more beautiful than before. But change is also inevitable when enough people decide that the status quo is unacceptable. When enough people decide that every child deserves to feel safe and valued in their school. When enough people decide that diversity should be celebrated, not punished. The standing ovation that followed was thunderous, but Maya wasn't finished. "Principal Brennan thought she could break my spirit by cutting my hair. She thought she could make me ashamed of who I am and where I come from. But she was wrong. She made me stronger. She gave me a voice. And she inadvertently started a movement that will protect countless other students from experiencing what I went through." As Maya left the stage that day, she was approached by a young girl who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The girl was wearing her hair in elaborate braids adorned with colorful beads, and her eyes shone with admiration. "Miss Maya," the little girl said shyly, "my teacher told me I couldn't wear my hair like this to school because it was too distracting. But after I heard your story, I told her that my hair is beautiful and that being different isn't wrong." She apologized and said I could wear my hair however I wanted. Maya knelt down to the girl's level and smiled. "Your hair is absolutely beautiful. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you need to hide who you are." As Maya stood up and watched, the little girl skipped back to her parents. She realized that Principal Brennan had indeed taught her about consequences. But the consequences hadn't been the ones Brennan intended. Instead of learning to submit to arbitrary authority, Maya had learned to question it. Instead of learning to be ashamed of her heritage, she had learned to celebrate it. And instead of learning to stay silent when faced with injustice, she had learned to speak out loudly and clearly. The little girl with the elaborate braids would never have to face what Maya had endured, and neither would countless other children, whose paths would be easier because one 13-year-old had refused to let her spirit be broken by a pair of electric clippers and one woman's narrow view of what a student should look like. In the end, Patricia Brennan's attempt to teach Maya about consequences had backfired spectacularly. The only lesson learned was that abuse of power will always be met with resistance, that children are stronger than their oppressors imagine, and that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of courage. Maya Richardson's hair had grown back, but more importantly, she had grown into exactly the kind of person the world needed more of. Someone who refused to accept injustice and who used her own pain to protect others from experiencing the same. 2 years after the incident that changed everything, Maya Richardson stood in front of her bedroom mirror, carefully braiding her own hair for the first time. Her auburn locks had grown back longer and thicker than before, cascading past her shoulders in waves that caught the morning sunlight streaming through her window. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, watching with tears of joy in her eyes as her granddaughter's fingers worked through the familiar pattern they both knew by heart. "You remember everything I taught you," Elena said softly, her voice filled with pride and wonder. Maya smiled at her grandmother's reflection in the mirror. "How could I forget? It's who we are, Abuela. It's part of our story. Today was special for more reasons than one." It was Maya's 16th birthday, but it was also the day she would graduate early from high school as valedictorian of her class. The shy, traumatized girl who had once hidden in a bathroom stall had transformed into a confident young woman who had already been accepted to Harvard University with a full scholarship to study law and social justice. But perhaps more significantly, today marked the grand opening of the Maya Richardson Center for Student Advocacy, a facility funded by donations from across the country and housed on the campus of what was formerly Riverside Middle School. The school had been completely restructured following Maya's case, with new leadership, new policies, and a new mission centered on celebrating diversity and protecting student rights. The center would serve as both a resource for students facing discrimination and a training facility for educators learning how to create more inclusive environments. Maya had been instrumental in designing the curriculum, drawing from her own experience and the thousands of stories shared by students who had reached out to her over the past 2 years. Dr. Sarah Williams, the new principal of what was now called Riverside Community Learning Center, had personally invited Maya to cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony. Dr. Williams represented everything that Patricia Brennan had not. She was compassionate, culturally aware, and deeply committed to ensuring that every student felt valued and respected. Maya, Dr. Williams had said during their planning meeting, "Your courage changed not just our school, but schools across the nation. This center will ensure that your story continues to protect and empower students for generations to come." As Maya finished braiding her hair, she thought about Patricia Brennan for the first time in months. The former principal had served her jail sentence and completed her probation, but her life had been forever altered by the choices she made that October day. She now worked as a night custodian at a warehouse outside the city, her education career permanently over, her reputation destroyed by her own actions. Maya had heard through Patricia Santos that Brennan had written her a letter several times over the years, but had never sent any of them. According to her therapist, whom Brennan had been court-ordered to see, the former principal was consumed by guilt and regret, finally understanding the magnitude of harm she had caused not just to Maya, but to every student who had ever felt unsafe or unwelcome in her school. Maya felt no satisfaction in Brennan's suffering. The anger and hurt that had once burned so fiercely in her chest had long since transformed into something more productive, a determination to ensure that no child would ever have to endure what she had experienced. The opening ceremony for the Maya Richardson Center drew hundreds of attendees, including students, parents, educators, and policymakers from across the region. Maya's story had become a case study in educational reform programs nationwide, and the center represented a tangible symbol of how individual courage could create systemic change. As Maya approached the podium to deliver the keynote address, she saw familiar faces in the crowd. Patricia Santos was there, having remained close to the family and continuing her work as an advocate for student rights. Tyler Morrison, the boy whose harassment had set the entire incident in motion, was also present. Now 18 and preparing for college, he had become one of Maya's most unlikely supporters, using his own experience to educate other students about the impact of bullying. 2 years ago, Maya began, her voice carrying clearly across the packed auditorium. "I thought my life was over. I thought that what happened to me in a principal's office would define me forever, that I would always be the girl who had her hair cut off as punishment, the victim who couldn't fight back." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all focused intently on her words. "But I was wrong. What happened to me wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning. It was the moment I learned that my voice mattered, that my dignity was worth fighting for, and that one person's courage to speak the truth could inspire thousands of others to do the same." Maya gestured to the center building behind her, its glass walls reflecting the afternoon sun like a beacon of hope. "This center exists because of all of you. Every parent who called the school board. Every teacher who spoke up against injustice, every student who shared their own story of discrimination, every person who believed that children deserve better than what I received that day. You turned my worst experience into something beautiful and meaningful. In the audience, Elena wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her granddaughter command the attention of hundreds with the same grace and dignity that had carried her through the darkest moments of their family's ordeal. David stood nearby, his own eyes moist with emotion as he thought about how far they had all come. The construction foreman who had once felt helpless to protect his daughter had found his own voice in advocacy work, helping other families navigate the complex intersection of education, law, and civil rights. The Maya Richardson Center will offer counseling services, legal assistance, and educational programs. Maya continued, but most importantly, it will offer something that every student deserves: the assurance that their identity, their heritage, their individual expression is not just tolerated, but celebrated. She reached up and touched her perfectly braided hair, the gesture drawing murmurs of appreciation from the crowd. My grandmother taught me that our hair carries our history, our strength, our connection to those who came before us. When Principal Brennan cut my hair, she thought she was cutting away my pride, my sense of self, my connection to my family's traditions. But she couldn't have been more wrong. Maya's voice grew stronger, more passionate as she built toward her conclusion. She made me realize that strength doesn't come from your appearance, or your willingness to conform, or your ability to make yourself small enough to avoid notice. Real strength comes from knowing who you are, standing up for what's right, and using your voice to protect others who might not be able to protect themselves. The applause that erupted was thunderous, with people rising to their feet throughout the auditorium. But Maya wasn't finished. To every student who has ever felt different, who has ever been told that their natural hair is unprofessional, their cultural clothing is inappropriate, their accent is wrong, their traditions are weird, I want you to know that you are perfect exactly as you are. Your differences are not flaws to be corrected. They are gifts to be celebrated. She looked directly into the television cameras that were broadcasting the ceremony live. And to every educator watching this, I want you to understand that you have the power to make every child in your care feel valued and respected. You can choose to see differences as problems to be solved, or as opportunities to learn and grow. The choice you make will echo through that child's life forever. As Maya stepped away from the podium to cut the ribbon, officially opening the center, she was approached by a young teacher who couldn't have been more than 25 years old. "Miss Richardson," the teacher said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I just wanted you to know that I became an educator because of your story. I wanted to be the kind of teacher who protects students instead of harming them. You changed my life before we ever met." Maya hugged the young woman warmly. "Then you've already made this center's mission successful. Every student you teach will be safer because you chose to care." As the celebration continued around her, Maya found herself standing in the exact spot where Riverside Middle School's main office had once been. The building had been completely renovated, but she could still remember every detail of that October day when her world had been turned upside down. She thought about the girl she had been then, scared, confused, overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. That girl could never have imagined standing here today, surrounded by supporters, having created something meaningful from her pain. Elena appeared beside her, as if sensing her granddaughter's reflective mood. "What are you thinking about, Mia?" Maya smiled and took her grandmother's hand. "I was thinking about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us end up leading to the best things we do with our lives. Principal Brennan thought she was punishing me, but she actually gave me the greatest gift imaginable." "What gift is that?" "She showed me that I was stronger than I ever knew. She showed me that speaking up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. And she showed me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to let someone else's small mind make you feel small." As the sun began to set over the Maya Richardson Center for Student Advocacy, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Maya felt a deep sense of completion. The frightened 13-year-old, who had been victimized by an adult's abuse of power, had grown into a 16-year-old advocate who would spend her life ensuring that no other child would face that same victimization. Patricia Brennan had tried to teach Maya about consequences, but the lesson had backfired completely. The consequences of that October day weren't shame, submission, or silence. They were strength, courage, and the unwavering determination to make the key world a better place for every child who would come after. Maya's hair had grown back. But more importantly, she had grown into exactly the person the world needed her to be. And that transformation, born from trauma but nurtured by love and supported by community, was the most beautiful consequence of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.